Good morning, YouTube. This is my morning coffee that I only have on the weekends. During the week, I only have coffee once in a day, which is at lunchtime. So, this morning's video is in sort of continuation with yesterday's video on the configuration provider. This is a unit testing challenge. I'm calling it a challenge. Of course, it's not a challenge. It's more like an exercise. If you haven't done unit testing, or even if you have been doing unit testing, I suggest you participate in this challenge. It's a level 100 challenge, so it's not like that complicated. It'll be interesting for you to go down this path of testing. This one class is a simple class, and it's a single class, so it should be easy for you to test this class. I'm pretty sure once you get done with the testing of this class, you'll realize that unit testing is a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun because it gives you that assurance that the stuff you made is working as expected. But it's also hard. It's not hard. The C# code is not hard. The C# code is C# code. There's actually the simplest code you probably write. What's hard about unit testing is how to think about testing. Most programmers that I worked with are not able to truly think from a testing standpoint. In fact, when I interview people, that's one of the things I'll ask them. I'll pose a problem or a requirement, and I say, how would you test this? So I'm interested to understand and see how they think about testing something, because if you write something and you know how to test it, you'll actually become a better coder. That's just my take on it. I certainly have changed my way of doing testing over the years. So I know that there's been a progression even in me with regards to the quality, in regards to just the way you think about things, So if for nothing else, take this challenge and see where you stand for yourselves. I will be posting the solution, if you will, my result of it on GitHub, and you guys can take a look at it after you've attempted something, at least in the project from yesterday. And then you can compare and contrast that with what I post on my GitHub in a separate project. So it doesn't mess up the one without the tests for those who come, years later to try and do the same thing. All right, now towards that effort, by the speaking of coffee from yesterday, if you watched that video yesterday, here's the coffee. Oof. It's too hot. Speaking of coffee, speaking of testing, test methods. Okay, so if you haven't done unit testing and you want to start, this is not going to be the video. So you can certainly use this as your first test you write, but I'm not going to explain to you how to start with creating a unit test. But certainly for this project, because it is a .NET Core project, when you add to that solution a unit testing project, make sure you're adding a .NET Core unit testing solution. Otherwise, things are not going to work as expected. Every test method has a certain format, and I'll explain what the format is. So if you're testing a method or a property of a class, then the first part of the test method is that property. The test method is broken up into 3 parts with the underscores between each part. The first part is the test method or the property, or if you're in the real world system, it's more like the feature you're testing. The second part after the underscore is the scenario. And the scenario needs to be in a business term, not a technical term. Of course, in this specific project, given that you're testing a configuration provider, the business doesn't care hoots whether you have one or not. The scenario will be more technical in nature than a typical unit test method would be. But nonetheless, the scenario is explaining this scenario. Every feature has n number of scenarios. So in this case, we are testing primarily properties. So every property has a number of scenarios. For each scenario, you want to describe the scenario. For example, in our I think the first property in that configuration provider is called email template folder, I think. The scenario would, and if you look at the requirements of that class, it's in the summary of the classes on top of the properties of each method. The requirements are in the summary, which is on top of each property. And I want you to look at that scenario, that requirement. Don't look at the code. Just look at the requirement and say, okay, I understand the requirement. Let me write a bunch of tests to test if this class satisfies the requirements. That's really what you want to do. But in order to do that, you're going to have account for different scenarios. And I'll give you an example here with regards to that email template folder or templates folder. So I'm paraphrasing. I don't have the code in front of me. So I'm paraphrasing as to what the requirements are. One, that it will give you back the configured value from the config file, right? Two, if the configured value does not start with a backslash, then the configuration provider will add the backslash on your behalf. So by the time you get it out of the configuration provider, it'll already have the backslash. So irrespective of the two different scenarios, one is where the backslash is already there, it'll just return it as it is. In the second case, the backslash is not there, it'll still return a backslash. And what if the value of the key, so there's a key and a value, so if the value is either spaces or an empty string, like nothing or blanks, a bunch of spaces, it's going to throw an exception with some message in there. I don't normally, if you're counting, but I think I've already talked about 4 scenarios. Can you count them? Okay, one is the sort of the main happy path. The setting in the config file has a starting backslash, and you get back that setting value exactly as it is untouched. First scenario. Second scenario, the setting in the config file does not have a backslash. Starting backslash. The configuration provider should return to you the value with a starting backslash. That's the second scenario. Third scenario is, what if the settings, the value is a bunch of spaces? Fourth scenario is, what if the value is an empty string? Fifth, anyone for a fifth? Okay, if you want to think about it, pause this video. I'll wait here. All right. The fifth scenario is, you ready for this? What if the key, so it's a key and a value pair, what if the key itself is missing? Keep in mind, you're testing a class. Now this class, because working with a physical file, your intent is to build a class that if and when it does throw an exception, it's going to give you exact and proper information about what exactly has gone wrong. Imagine this scenario: you've deployed your systems to say the cloud or your production environments. Typically, you don't have access to the production environments because there's another team or other people for security reasons and a bunch of other reasons. You may not have access to anything about production. The best you're going to get is an exception message logged in your log file. Look at that log file message. And you need to determine exactly what is wrong with your config setting in this specific case, right? Is the value incorrect? Is the value spaces? Is the value a blank? Or is the key missing in the config file? You need to know the details, because then you're going to have to tell somebody to go fix it. It's not like I got an exception, so now let me figure out why the exception occurred. You don't want to be in that situation. When you get an exception, you need to know exactly why you got the exception by looking at the message in the log file, right? This class has been designed in that fashion. So it's going to throw different exceptions. It's going to throw the same exception type, but it's going to have different exception messages for the different scenarios. You need to test that. And the way you're going to test that is you're going to, of course, assert that a certain type of exception occurred, but you're also going to check certain keywords exist in the message to indicate to you that the exception is being thrown for the right reason. I hope that makes sense. All right. So, and I'm just coming off the top of my head. So there's at least 5 scenarios, if not more. So think about this. The scenario, how do you describe the scenario? How do you, in your words, describe that scenario that you're testing? And then the last part of the test method name is the expectation. What is your expectation? If this was the scenario, what do you expect the expectation to be? I'm not going to give you even the hints on what the scenario and expectation should be named, because that's the hardest part of any programming aspect. I think the hardest part about programming is coming up with names. Names that you understand today, names that your future self is going to understand 10 years from now. And of course, your team members, anybody else that's maintaining that system after you've gone, is able to understand really clearly. So focus on the naming, the scenario, and the expectation. And the scenario and the expectation should leave no guesswork involved. For example, blank is different from spaces. Empty is different from missing. Use the right words to indicate the right things. So when the key in the config file is missing, it's missing. It's not like the value is not there. The key is missing. That's missing is meaning it's just not there. If it's empty, it means, like as we call it empty. You can call it blank in English. You normally would use blank instead of empty. But space is not the same as blank. So think about the words you use for this to describe the scenario and the expectation. And then what I typically will do with my team, because when I'm working with my team, we get requirements like, in our sprint planning, and then we start the sprint. So every dev has a set of requirements. If I'm doing the code review, after the dev has built the feature, and I'm doing so many code reviews in a day, I can't context switch between one dev's work and the next dev's work and understand exactly what the scenarios need to be tested for that feature. So what we do is, as a team, we sit down and we we arrive at all the scenarios for each of the features. So each dev is keeping a log of the scenarios that they need to test for and the expectations for those tests, so that we are all one, the entire team understands what's being built. And two, the dev specifically that's building that feature has written down every test, every scenario, and every expectation, just the test method signatures. That's it. No implementation. We will go further and discuss the arrangement. How do you arrange for something, especially when it's a brand new kind of thing, and I'm seeing, or the dev is seeing, there could be some difficulty in the arrangement part. How do you arrange for the scenario to exist? That's also being written down by way of comments inside the test method. Like, arrange the thing like this. Maybe we discuss some things, and there's key things to remember, or remind the dev when they get to doing the testing, how we discuss that. And the same with the assertions. There could be scenarios where the assertions are also complicated. Many a time, you could implement a test. The test says it's functional, as in it's working, as in it's passing, sorry. But either the arrangement is flawed or the assertion is flawed, and so you're getting a false positive. So it's very, very important. That's why I say unit testing is hard. There's so many things about unit testing that is hard. Nothing to do with the coding part at all. It's thinking about, how do I arrange for that scenario to exist so I can do the test? And how do I assert that what it did is correct? It's not a simple, values return a true or a false. Because you have to ensure that at no point in time are you getting false positives. The other aspect about testing is also you have to ensure that the test fails for the right reasons. And the third is, if a test is passing, does it fail for the right reasons? Even though it's supposed to be passing, your test is a positive test. But does it fail for the right reasons? Because you want to know that the test is not passing just because it happens to be passing. What if something changes in your system and it's supposed to be failing, but it's still passing? You don't know that the test would fail. A positive test would fail if that positive thing did not work correctly. So you got to test all those things. I don't mean in this specific last case, I don't mean you have to write a test for it. But while writing the test, and it starts to pass, because it's a positive test, you have to test. By test, I mean now at this point, just kind of modifying the scenario, not the code, but like, let's say something's supposed to be, the file is supposed to be there, and it's passing because the file is there. Okay, remove the file and ensure the test actually fails because the file is not there. Like, that's what I mean by, you don't have to write new code or a new test to see that failure. That may be a scenario that you have to test for anyways, but I'm just saying if a test is passing, that's not enough. You have to make sure it fails also if it were to fail for that a specific scenario. Anyway, we'll go deeper into unit testing probably in later videos. This is just the kind of the starting point. I just don't want to scare people off, or I want people to get kind of excited about unit testing, but it is a very powerful, it makes you feel really confident about the code you're putting out in production if you do good testing. There's nothing that it's completely unmatched. That feeling that you could go to production in instant because you know your tests, you trust your tests to have done exactly what the system, you trust that the system is doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing because your tests are telling you it's doing what it's supposed to be doing, right? So if you write good tests, you get way more confidence in the system, in the code that you've written, and so you can go to production just on the top of a hat, right? At least that's how I feel about testing and when I write tests for my systems. Once you got down to just the common parts, if you want to implement, that's fantastic. I think that will be cool if people want to go and try their hand at implementing some of these tests, if not all of the tests, right? And then some point during this week, I will post my own solution and I'll make a video that will explain some of the things I've done for the sake of those tests. You can then compare my solution with your own attempts and see where you fall. And if you have questions, then certainly you can ask me in the comments for that video. So I'm hoping this is exciting. I'm hoping to encourage people, even those who've been doing unit testing. I know most of you would have been doing mock kind of testing. This is not that kind of testing. This is what I call real testing. There was a video some Google folks put out a few years ago, like 4 or 5, maybe even longer, years ago on YouTube. You could probably look for it. The title is Stop Mocking and Start Testing. So if you've been mocking, I'm saying stop mocking and start testing. Do the real thing. Do the real kind of testing. So, well, coffee's pretty got cold by now, but I'm going to let you guys go. And I will see you next time.